Welcome to Prize Fighters, Circus Freaks, and Gangsters. I'm Greta.
And I'm Jamie.
And we're here to look at media that depicts the criminally underexamined 19th century.
Oh, I love that pun. That was well played.
And we are here to start talking about the TV series Warrior. So Jamie, tell me a little about this show.
This show was originally on HBO, I believe, or Cinemax. It doesn't really matter. It's on HBO Max now, right? And it is the original concept that Bruce Lee had for the TV show Kung Fu. For anybody who's a Bruce Lee mark like myself, the movie or the TV show Kung Fu was originally conceived by Bruce Lee to have him star in it and be about the travels of a Chinese immigrant through the American Southwest. And it was instead recast with David Carradine because they thought that a white actor would play better with American audiences, and the show was trash as a result. Now we have the historically epic and unbelievably violent Warrior, which I think is everything Bruce Lee would have wanted this show, the Kung Fu, to be when he originally conceived it.
I mean, I think about a lot of the actors that he would have had to choose from, and the filming abilities and techniques at the time. I just don't think the fighting would have come through. So I think it's just a lot better now.
Yeah.
But we are totally going to have to do a bonus episode on the history of the time period Bruce Lee was drawing from, because it's a global history he's drawing from.
Oh, it absolutely is. I mean, so it's splendid as we conceived it to really cover stuff that had to do with American history, but world history in the 19th century was just as crazy as it was in America, if not more crazy. I mean, China's history at this time was... Yeah. I mean, you're really a Brit and Anglo kind. You're kind of an Anglo history person, like Anglo in the U.S.
Yeah, I'm coming at American food, and at least in the 17th and 18th century, it's almost entirely British.
Okay, not French at all.
A little bit, but if you look at the cookbooks that they were working from, especially in the 17th century, they're only using British cookbooks. Like the British cookbooks have like French recipes in them. Okay. But the French influence really doesn't get going into the late 18th century.
Interesting. I mean,
yeah.
I really would have expected, especially because everybody in Europe was aping French cuisine, I would have expected Americans to be aping French cuisine.
Well, remember, we're 3 months away.
Oh, well, all right. That is true. Well, I guess that doesn't really pertain as much to the show as we're going to discuss it, though, because San Francisco is a long, long way from France, and that is the setting for this amazing show. San Francisco specifically, I guess this would be around 1877, because season 2, the San Francisco riots occur, and that is 1877. So we're looking at 1876, 1877 for this time period.
Yeah, they technically say 1878 in the program, but...
Oh, did it?
Hand wavy.
Oh, yeah. Because this is... And we're going to probably have to hammer this home every single time we discuss this, but these things are historical. They're not history. And do you have a better way to put it?
These are great stories to tell, and this is a portion of American history that we've sort of glossed over. Like anytime we sort of learn about the 19th century, there was the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812, there was slavery, there was the Civil War, and then the railroads happened, Industrial Revolution. So we miss this 100 years of fascinating mixing bowl culture that got us to when, in the 70s and 80s when they're talking about America as a mixing bowl of cultures. And it's like, well, how did it get that way? The 19th century is how it got that way.
Yeah, and I think that maybe the reason why we skip over the 19th century in the United States is because it's icky because of slavery, and then there's a Civil War, and the whole thing's gross. But I think most countries probably have the same 19th century garbage.
Well, and it's complicated, too.
I mean, that was garbage time for the whole world.
Oh, yeah. No, and it's just a really complicated century. And when you're doing American history, in grade school especially, but high school. In the past, we've really depended on these neat and tidy, cut and dried stories. These are the good guys, these are the bad guys, and the 19th century is full of gray people. They're kind of good, they're kind of bad, and I love Warrior because it starts off on that note right away. Nobody is a good guy by the end of the first episode.
No, and there's a reason for that. So the show opens with people being let out of a container, just like, I guess, like they're loaded into container ships and illegally smuggled into the United States. Now it's the same thing at the beginning of this show. They're in this container, they're being let out into the world and, seeing the sun for the first time in months, probably.
3 weeks.
And was it 3 weeks?
3 weeks. I looked it up.
Look at you. Well, forgive my hyperbole, but they were coming from China at that time, which had been racked by revolutions for the last 100 years. Since the Qing took over in China, there had been revolutions and famines and rebellions, and they were in the middle, or they had just finished a civil war called the Taiping Rebellion that was led by a guy who said he was Jesus' son. I don't know how the math works on that. And he led this army of psychopaths into Beijing and just trashed everything, and he destroyed the country. So everybody is starving, and they're just piling onto these ships, trying to come to America to get a new life. And when they hit the shores, they are greeted by the Tongs. Are you familiar with the Tongs, Greta?
So I am. I was about to say, for our listeners, please go into just some basics of the Tongs, because I think that's a big thing we need to go into in depth at some point. Because when you think about gangs on the East Coast, we've got the Irish gangs and then the Italian mafia, but on the West Coast.
Yeah, the West Coast. Well, the Tongs did hit the East Coast around the time that Herbert Asbury's book about gangs in New York was ending, because they came from San Francisco and hit New York. And there's actually a book about it that I was planning on reading, about a massacre in New York City having to do with the Tongs. And so the Tongs were known as criminal street gangs or criminal organizations in the United States, but they began as benevolent organizations for the immigrants who had come to the United States, and they were just having a hell of a time because they were basically filling the same labor niche that the Native Americans and the Spanish people in the area were filling. And so they were taking that and the jobs from the Irish who were living in the area, or that's how it was perceived. They were taking these jobs. And so there were attacks on them, and they had to start these, what amounted to gangs to protect themselves. And one of the two most popular gangs at the time, and neither of the two gangs mentioned in Warrior are actually historical, but the main one to arise at that time was actually there to protect female sex workers because they were being trafficked, and they were killing people to stop that. And so the Tongs eventually developed these people who were called hatchet men. So when you see these kung fu movies with all these dudes running around with hatchets, those are Tongs, and they were actually called hatchet men, and they were badasses. They had basically these combat hatchets that they had specially modified. I guess they're like the hatchet version of a sawed-off shotgun, and they were murderous, crazy, nasty, badass dudes. But they also kept all the Chinese who were not criminals safe in China.
Okay, yeah, we'll get into the weapons a little bit more, but I was just sort of looking at the hatchets, yes, they were. And I'm wondering how much of that was an adaptation of materials ready to hand, because I know that there's certain martial arts weapons, both Chinese and Japanese traditions, that are modified cultivation tools. And so I'm wondering if some of those fighting styles transferred really well to that forward-facing handled blade.
Well, that's an awesome thing that you bring up. And actually, so what we think of as Kung Fu started when the Qing took over China and the Ming Dynasty, because the Qing really didn't understand anything about the Chinese religions.
Well, because the Qing came from Mongolia, right? So they were coming...
they were Manchus. So they were... the tribe is called the Jurchen or the Yurchen. That would be the area basically in between China, like mainland China,
Yeah.
China that you think of, and Korea. And so they were kind of like Mongols, but they weren't. They spoke a different language. They had a distinct culture unto themselves, and they controlled basically northern China and through Inner Mongolia, and then there were Mongols above them. They actually controlled China a couple of times throughout history.
Right.
And and they spread so they're from Xinjiang through into Manchuria all the way to Korea. So above the Chinese and below the Mongols.
Yeah, so like all the delicate bureaucracy and 2,000 layers of roles in the imperial Chinese dynasties. They didn't know about it, they didn't care about it. Or they might have known about it a little bit, but they definitely didn't care about it.
Right. And so the Ming government shifted itself into the Shaolin monasteries. And the Shaolin monasteries, especially in southern China, split into two groups. The one group was the regular Buddhists, and the other group didn't give a flying fuck about Buddhism, and they turned themselves into pure killing machines. And that's where we got the wellspring of martial arts to come out of China. And so when you see those tongs talking about who did you study under and this and that, that's because those people were very, very famous in China at the time. The guys who had really distilled martial arts down into their distinct fighting arts, and like actually kung fu was considered to be so powerful at the time that when the Boxer Rebellion started at the end of the Qing dynasty, when like people were actually they believed that kung fu was literally made you superhuman. They would do all these specialized gymnastics routines and like warm-ups, strength building routines, and then they considered themselves to be bulletproof. So they always fought with hatchets and swords and stuff like that. So they were really, really used to using a hatchet by the time they got to U.S. shores.
Oh, and so they were actually using like a hatchet-shaped hatchet. This wasn't an adaptation to the American material.
No. That was they were using hatchets in China as well. It was a common thing because you can easily hide these hatchets because they cut down the handle until it was just what you wouldn't see any of the handle sticking out of your fist. It was just that. So they would just come up and hack a person real fast and then bail, or whip it at somebody and then bail. They were really, really badass dudes. Oh, and by the way, the boxers and those people, those were basically Chinese berserkers. They engaged in what's known as Soma Fera. So they were that bad.
Like I knew that they thought of themselves as bulletproof, and sort of you describing the way they work themselves up into that frenzy. I'm like, yeah, that's berserkers.
Yep, they're full-blown berserkers,
And especially with like the herbal tradition of medicines that the Chinese have, I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't a little chemical enhancement to go along.
No, I included it in... No, they were high as shit. I just don't remember off the top of my head. I believe they were one of the Datura users. They did use hash, and they probably used opium as well because it was the opium wars. You know, everybody was on opium at the time.
I 100% believe there were like other like sort of agonists that kind of helped it along because just the Chinese herbal tradition is so regional and deep. I'm sure there were layers. Okay, so let's get back to our main dude who comes off the boat into the face of some of the drunkest government officials I think I've seen on film that early in an episode.
But my God, is that historically
yes.
accurate? The guy who was guarding President Lincoln was too drunk to guard him, and then the guy who was supposed to assassinate President Johnson or Vice President Johnson was too drunk to assassinate him. So I think it's fair to say everybody was drunk as shit in the government at this point.
I loved it. I was just laughing. That just put it down there. In fact, I love a lot of the establishment that happens. Boom. You see that it's a steamship. You see everybody blinking. They throw down with the rice right away. So you get this idea that like, okay, white rice is important to these people and the custom guys don't get it because, they're on the take, so they're never hungry.
And I don't think white people probably ate any rice at all at that point.
Not on the West Coast. On the East Coast, fancy people ate rice. They prepared it very differently. Yeah.
Interesting. So how did they prepare it?
It's a cooking technique. So Asian style rice cookery, you boil it and then you steam it, and you want the grains to stick together because you're eating it
Right.
with chopsticks. Whereas in West African, Indonesian style rice, and then European style rice preparation, you boil it most of the way. You're also typically working with different varieties of rice, and then you sort of dry it, steam over heat rather than steaming it, and you want every single grain to be separate. So in our modern context, think about the rice that you get with Indian food.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So that's Indian. They were getting Indian rice from the British rather than Chinese or Asian rice. Okay, I got it.
It's really complicated. I'm going to have a whole episode in the 19th century about American rice snobbery. It's fabulous. But yeah, these
I vastly prefer sticky rice, so I really don't understand the obsession with polished rice. You'll have to explain.
Oh,
it
no,
to
no,
me.
no. Actually, the nicest sticky rice is polished. Yeah,
Really? All right.
polishing just has to do with getting the bran and the husk off. Rice has as much depth of study as like wine. I mean, it's insane.
Well, I guess I'm ignorant about rice then.
We're just coming from a Western context. We don't get it.
Well, we have no idea what kind of sticky rice they're eating in this scene. But it gets kicked into the dirt, and the man's so hungry, he's trying to eat it out of the dirt. And then Assam, our man, steps up, and he does look and act so much. I mean, he doesn't look exactly like Bruce Lee, but I mean, he has a similar build, and then he perfected the Bruce. I mean, we all grew up like imitating Bruce Lee. He has it down, so he is. I mean, Bruce Leroy has nothing on this man. His Bruce Lee imitation is perfect, I think.
I will say, for me, the face that Assam presents is that iconic Toshiro Mifune. His photographs because he has the same facial hair as Mifune, who's a Japanese actor who was like really super famous in a bunch of samurai movies.
Yeah, Kurosawa movies, right? I don't remember what the guy looks like.
But I'm just saying, like, he's just like beautiful theatrically, and I think they made the most of kind of these pictures that are running around in our heads, and did that for Assam.
Yeah, he's phenomenal. I think he was the actor who played Storm Shadow in the G.I. Joe movies.
Really?
I've seen him in other stuff. He's absolutely phenomenal. He's been in other stuff. I think he's found his way into a Marvel movie as well.
I super duper love there was a whole bunch of class level setting going like right as you came off the boat. There was the rice thing. There was the outfits that the custom agents are wearing. But then there's the Tong guy who's there kind of like recruiting guys. He's got the Q, which is like one way of status setting. If your hair is cut short, like the way Assam's is, that's a whole nother set of status markers. Even if you don't get it, you're like, okay, these people look different in very important ways. And I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, the Q it's a very, very interesting cultural thing that was instituted by the Qing and by the Manchu. And so it's that haircut that you think of when you think of like the movies you used to watch on Saturday afternoon for like Kung Fu Saturday, or I don't know what they called it. You guys had it too. We had Kung Fu Theater that's all we watched.
It means the same thing.
Kung
Fu
Theater.
Yeah.
And so that haircut is called a Q. And so you'd grow it as long as you could. And it was like a great shame thing to have your Q cut off. But it was also, one would assume that when you went to the United States, because everybody hated the Manchu so much in China, that guy would have cut his hair. So it's a curious decision he does set himself apart like he is above everyone else. And that's the way he comports himself, which I guess is why he chose to wear that kind of ruling class hairstyle.
Yeah, there's a lot of we're American Chinese, we're here to create our own thing on the West Coast, but a lot of the old rules that were sort of like bred in their bones are still very important to the people who came over on the boat. There's a whole bunch of fracture lines in the Chinese community already set up because, I mean, this is the 1870s and San Francisco has been up and running since like the 1850s. So yeah, just like a lot of, when we're studying American history, we sort of get to know about the political factions among, the white Americans, but there's just as many or more political factions going on in these Chinese. And it's just like overlapping. You're like, oh God, this is going to be an awesome mess.
Just like in Gangs of New York, there are so many overlapping alliances and differing concerns, and it is wild, and it's so nuanced, and that's what makes the 1900s or the 19th century so much fun. But again, there's so many parallels between then and now too, that you can always, any scene in this show, you could really draw a direct line from that to an event that's happened in the last month and just say, we're still battling the same problems.
Speaking of that, we get into the political influence stuff, wham, right off the bat. The Tong guy who brings Assam into Hapway, he gets like a little commission. He gets a little bounty for bringing them a new fighter. But then right away we go over to the American government office, and there's like a rich San Francisco dude who's like, hey, you were supposed to provide me protection. What the hell, man? I'm pissed off. So yeah, there's already a bunch of political wheeling and dealing going on in the two different spheres we know we're going to be dealing with.
That scene that you're talking about was really interesting because it was a factory owner who was complaining to the mayor because two of his workers had been killed by Irish people in a back alley. And he was demanding that the police do something about this. Meanwhile, the mayor has no interest in protecting the Chinese because by doing so, he would alienate both the nativists and the Irish. And the Irish are clearly the powerful faction here. And I love the fact that this... I don't know what the actor's name who plays the head of the Irish faction. But the man's a phenomenal actor, and he looks every bit of the badass that I was thinking of when I was picturing John Morrissey from the Gangs of the New York story, because this guy's a bare-knuckle brawler, and they did a pretty good job depicting bare-knuckle brawling at the time. I mean, it wasn't dead on, but I mean, boxing in movies isn't the way boxing looks in real life.
You want it to look good on camera, and I never hate on them for making it look good.
Exactly. And it's really good, because even down to the fact that he takes a knee at one point and the other guy stops hitting him, because the way that you ended a round in bare knuckle boxing or anything was to touch a knee to the ground. So when you see those things, like they went 94 rounds, they didn't go 94 5-minute rounds, because people would have died no matter how much cocaine and strychnine they had in them. I mean, those rounds could have been 5 seconds, because the guy could have gotten hit and got knocked down, and then by the time he got back to his feet, he had a minute and a half break, and then get hit and knocked down again, and then got up and got knocked down again. I mean, those things could go on forever. But this show is just so great. One thing I wanted to ask you though, because I love the Irish guys' outfits. What is your take on the fashion? Because if, as a callback to our first episode, you loved the fashion in Gangs of New York, and you especially loved the fit of the clothing. I didn't get to watch this episode with you, so I didn't get to hear you gush about the clothes.
So in this one, again, I thought, okay, they're putting money into this. It looks great. The Chinese clothes that they're wearing versus the American clothes, you can kind of see that the Chinese have a much more sophisticated textile industry than the Americans do, which is spot on. Even these really poor people have not super sucky clothes.
No, they're wearing silk.
No, the immigrants are wearing cotton.
Oh, were they? I was thinking of oh yeah, the really, really poor people are wearing cotton.
The people getting off the boat are wearing cotton.
Yeah, I'm thinking of their vests are all amazing with the dragons.
Oh yeah. No. The Tong guys and the sex workers, they have a lot of silk. This show, when it comes to the main characters, I feel like they do a really, really good job of taking very important inspiration from the fashion of the times, and then sort of bringing it up a little bit so the actors are comfortable in their clothes. They can move in their clothes, and there's definitely a little spandex happening, which again,
okay.
I'm not mad at them. In order to move like everybody moves, everybody's clothes are going to have to be a lot baggier if they're just made out of wool or wool silk. So never mind. Just make it look good. I'm here to be entertained.
I'm with you on that, but one thing I was thinking of in regards to the clothing, and like I was looking at the evolution of kung fu, but when I was prepping for this, and I was thinking that it was a good thing that the Chinese were wearing the loose clothes. They had to wear the loose clothes they were wearing because nobody was kicking anybody in the face.
Right, because they were peasants. They had to work in those.
Yeah, but you also couldn't kick anybody in the face with tight pants on, tight wool pants. There's no way. You're not until Chuck Norris and the darts came along. There was no way to kick a man in the face with tight pants on.
And so the baggier, poorly fitting stuff that the customs workers were wearing, I was like, that is spot on. And so the fact that the Tong guys, when they're in their red and black suit outfits, are going to be beautifully tailored, that totally makes sense. Now the fits and the cuts and everything are a lot more modern, but they're just supposed to look good.
And my God, do they look
right?
good. Everybody in this show looks amazing.
So everybody in the TV show is going to look good to modern eyes. We're not here for this to be 100% historical accurate. The part that did make me laugh from a fashion aspect is the place where the most fantasy seems to come up is what the sex workers are wearing in the brothels.
Oh, we're back to the corsets, which gave my wife a laugh as well, and I just looked at her with the same blank stare I gave you when you started laughing about the corset with nothing over it in the last episode.
So my favorite outfit is there is one woman who's wearing like this bustier thing that has these big freaking like 3/4 inch grommets that did not exist.
Can you wait? You gotta stop for a second and explain to all of the men in the audience what a grommet is. Because I'm thinking of Wallace and grommet. And I don't even remember what grommet was.
On your shoes, if you've got like little metal circles that you put your shoelaces in, those are grommets.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
And so she's got like these 3/4 inch shiny semi-stainless metal of some sort grommets on the front of her bustier with a ribbon going through it. And I'm like, it's decorative as hell, but no. Buttonholes were hand sewed at that age. You know, whatever.
We were right on the cusp of Levi's, though, weren't we? This was right about the time Levi's were about to hit the scene, right? Or at the time.
Right. And so he did have like those punch grommets. That's fine. But the kind with the holes that you put your shoelaces through, that happens later.
Oh, okay, cool. No, I was just saying I was trying to put like modern fashion into this, and I was just like, oh yes, this was Levi's were around 1876.
Yeah, Levi's are with the woven canvas cotton. Talk about Civil War adjacent stuff, finding new markets for American cotton when we're no longer exporting it to London so much. Yeah.
Oh, well,
and also the weaving technology caught up. Yeah. Okay. So there was a lot of great fashion, a little bit of silliness, but just enough to make me laugh, not enough to make me go, oh, what are you doing here? I mean, it's not Rain. There is a series on Mary Queen of Scots when she's living in France.
Oh, yeah.
The fashion in there is...
We've got that on the list to watch. No. I meant my wife and I have that on our list to watch.
Oh, okay. Yeah. They look like they're getting their costume money from a teenager's allowance and shopping at Forever 21. It is
All right.
Hilarious. Like you just got to go turn off your brain and go along for the water slide ride. It's great. Okay. So that's fashion cast here. But yes, so we've got
19th century fashion cast.
So we've got our two governmental spheres. We've got the Tongs, and then we've got sort of the official mayoral. He's the mayor of San Francisco, right? Or is he the governor?
No, he is the mayor of San Francisco.
That's right. We do have a capital in Sacramento. That's what they mentioned that.
Yeah. And it's kind of like it has kind of the same feel as Deadwood in that they're constantly, like the people were constantly bitching about the people in wherever the hell the government center was, Yankton, and those assholes in Yankton are going to come and make us do what they want. And they have the kind of the same feel in Sacramento. But I think that's because, what did we say this year was?
1878.
They said it was 1878? Okay, so the city had only existed for 16 years. And, it was brand new. And it blew up out of nothing as a port town. And so they had an emperor of America who lived in San Francisco, and he was active there at the time. He's not featured in the show, but I'm hoping maybe he pops up in season 3. Because he was one of the active potentates in that state, and he lived in San Francisco. He was the only person from the United States government, quote unquote government, with whom the King Kamehameha from Hawaii would meet. He would only treat with the Emperor of America, who was just a crazy person who had lost all his money trying to arbitrage goods from Asia or something.
We will definitely have to do some Hawaiian history at some point because, that is part of all of the 19th century craziness.
Oh, yes. Hawaii's awesome. Oh, that's right. China or Hawaiian unification and independence and the statehood happened all at the same time in this era. This is the best era. It's the best era.
Okay, so we've got our 2 sort of seats of power, and you get to see sort of like all of these markers of power in the Tong headquarters. You've got all the rich carvings. You've got indoor gas lamps. You've got that big massive table. You've got the guy holding the porcelain teacups. I mean, like what they're wearing. God damn. You can just see these are powerful people from their setting. And then the same thing with the mayor's home. Like there's glass everywhere. His wife is wearing layers and layers of complicated clothes. They're both wearing, patterned stuff. He's getting shaved at home. He doesn't have to go out to get shaved.
Yeah, and they don't show it, I don't think, in the first episode, but when they do show where the railroad workers, so the people coming off that boat are told that their first 4 months of work in the gold mines or whatever, or no, it's on the railroad, is to pay for their passage from China, from the famines in China. Now they get to starve for 4 months in the United States, and if they survive this 4 months of basically slavery, then they get to be free and go find their own fortune in the United States.
They say that for like a hot second as they're coming off the boat, but it only gets said once, so it's sort of like a setup.
Yeah, and eventually they show their living conditions, and that is such a stark difference from the living conditions that you see for the Tongs, and it really explains, like, you wanted a life of crime back then. Otherwise, you were either living in a hovel or you were sleeping outside, panning gold and basically drinking yourself blind, or you know what I mean? There weren't a lot of options to you then.
and they're showing that the 2 centers of power are based on one sort of crime or another, whether it's under the American government or it's the Tongs. I mean, they make that real clear.
Yeah, there's no good guy in this. And in fact, the good guys are the bad guys with the most conscience, basically.
Right. Okay, so the big sort of first conflict happens. There's the guy who's he's building some brick something, and some of his workers are killed by the Irish, and it becomes this court case. And they're like, well, we should dismiss it because there's nobody to testify for the prosecution. And because this is basically a fight opera, wrestling, WWE, WWF was kind of in the back of my head. Like, what are the storylines? How are we going to go? And the most beautiful face is introduced to us in the courtroom. Richard Lee.
Oh, yes. The Southern gentleman. Because he's from Georgia in the Civil War, and just like the one guy jumps up and he's like, I'm not having this. Your instinct is to immediately hate him.
Yeah.
But he's just like, he's exactly like, he's a romance novel, wet dream Southern gentleman from this era. Like, right? Wouldn't you say? Not a scrap of racism in him, just a sweetheart.
Oh my God.
He's going to throw his coat over a puddle on the ground for a lady if she doesn't step in it.
Yeah, well, like before I got to know him, I was like, he is either going to be the good guy character in this, or he's dead before the episode ends. So like I didn't know, because I was like, oh my God, he's either a tragic face or he's the hero. He's going to be such an innocent baby. Like the way he was introduced, he's like, I'll testify for the prosecution of, oh baby, oh you poor innocent fragile soul, how's this gonna go? And
again it's so now in this courtroom there is a judge who is a native. He's a Native American. When I say Native American, I mean in the terms of what people in America thought of natives then, which meant your family had been living in America for a while. He's a white guy. So he's a white, quote-unquote, Native American. And he is looking at two people who he hates. The Irish, who he considers disgusting, and the Chinese, who he considers to be non-human. And then a third guy, a Southerner, who literally we just got done killing in droves. This man stands up and volunteers to be a witness for a killing that nobody in this courtroom gives a flying fuck about in the first place, because it is two Chinese guys who got killed by two Irish guys, and nobody gives a shit. Let them kill each other.
Let them fight. Let them kill each other. Totally.
Yeah. The mayor wants these two groups to kill each other so that the quote-unquote Native Americans...
I think we can call them nativist Americans, and that will cover all of the...
Nativist.
Complexity here.
Yes. There we go. Yeah, and I can stop doing air quotes that nobody can see. But yeah, so this is just such a crazy combination of people. And now there's fracturing in the police, because the police didn't realize that they have this new Georgian on the squad. So there are Irish guys in the police force against the nativists in the police force, and a Southerner in the police force against the criminals allied against all of these different ethnic lines. It's an insane maelstrom. And then I think they do a great job of showing that the Chinese are speaking a different language and kind of shifting the camera perspective to demonstrate that. But I think it would probably make us throw up if they did it true to life, because you'd be spinning around in circles constantly, because it was a Tower of Babel. You had people speaking Irish Gaelic, you had Germans, you had tons of Spanish speakers, you had Native Americans, then you had people speaking American or British English.
Yeah, the stew of languages.
Oh, and multiple different Chinese languages.
I was going to say, good on the production team for going with Cantonese Chinese, because, yeah, that's where a huge number of the West Coast railroad workers came from. They came out of in Canton.
Oh, okay. So one of the things that when I was brushing up on my Chinese history, that region did send a ton of people to the United States, because when they had it was called the Dungar Revolution or Rebellion in Inner Mongolia, and that was Muslim Chinese rebelling because they just wanted to rule themselves. The Uyghurs were part of that. Then when that caused a famine, a bunch of ethnic Chinese went south. Han Chinese went south, and they were then called the Hakka.
Okay, yeah, know them.
But they spoke Mandarin, and I thought the Hakka were an entirely different ethnicity, but they were just Chinese people who spoke a different dialect of Chinese, and the Southerners hated them, so they killed them in droves, and then kicked the rest over to the United States.
They were definitely different culturally. The Hakka, for a lot of people, were thought of as kind of the hillbillies.
Well, they did live in the hills.
Yeah, because they weren't like city people. They didn't have the 200 different fine gradations of social status, and yeah, so they were.
Well, they were refugees.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to some of our other characters that we get introduced to.
Oh, but that does bring up a good point, that there are at least two different factions of Chinese people in the United States, or in this fighting each other as well, in addition to the different tongs.
So, and the two tongs at this point are kind of representing the two factions, more or less, as the two centers of power.
Yeah, there were like 6 to 12 of them, I think. Around 1888, there were about 50,000 Tong in the United States, but that was up from like 50 in 1950. So I don't know how many. We'll call it 25,000.
But I'm just saying, for the purposes of this show, they've set it up so there's two opposing Tongs that we're going to be. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There were two main Tongs in real life too, so
okay.
it kind of follows real life.
So we've got our two Tongs, and then we sort of have two opposing female characters. There's Atoy, who runs the brothel for the Hop Ways, and so is their kind of informant, kind of spy, and I love the fact that they do spend some time on her character and who she is and what she's up to and how she's kind of at the head of this intelligence network. And it's another sign that the Chinese are much better and more practiced at colonizing than the British were, because the British, when they sent people out to colonize, they sent religious fanatics and criminals, whereas the Chinese, you've got workers, but you've also got farmers, and they're like, you can't just send all men. As messed up as the whole brothel system and everything is, there is...
Yeah, the British and the Spanish really followed the same dumbass
Right.
model, and the Germans and the Chinese followed a similar model to each other.
Yeah, and it's just, how do we not have war quite so quickly? The Spanish got on the bandwagon a lot faster, just because they didn't segregate themselves from the local populations the way a lot of other colonizers do. And so they created family units sort of wherever they went, just through a different method. And the French were more like that as well.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, the British are just sort of like, we're going to keep ourselves segregated and
make
sexually
everybody else
frustrated. So
Yes.
and it's going to go terribly. Oh, and our food's going to be awful. Yeah, I mean, that was one thing. The Chinese were hungry when they came off the boat, but they tended not to be quite so diseased and have scurvy, because even though they didn't have enough food, they would pack food that would keep them more healthy, because they had much more vitamins in their preserved food than the British.
Because it was more
They
pickle?
had a lot of pickles. Like you think about, so there's this like fried dace in black bean sauce that was sort of famous as a travel food. And so you would fry these dace, these fish, and then you would put it in this fermented black bean sauce in a pot, and that would be a flavoring for white rice. And so it had some protein. So rice is an almost complete protein. It has a lot of amino acids, and so you just need a little fish, some of the proteins from the beans, and then the fermented stuff contains a lot of the vitamins that you need. And so, yeah, they were hungry.
Oh, and you had also they were using fish sauce for everything, so I get it. They were hungry
Right.
but not malnourished. That's a really interesting distinction, and it would explain why they were taking all these jobs from all the Americans, because these people were starving because they had no vegetables, especially out
Yeah,
west.
and
It
so
was
the
a mess.
Chinese farmers showed up and they're like, you don't have frickin' vegetables. How about I grow you some vegetables and then sell it to the gold miners and the railroad workers at vastly inflated prices? Oh, you have restaurants for rich people. Guess what? So it was sort of like, we hate the Chinese taking all of our jobs, but we don't know how to do them.
Yes. Or we know how to do them, but we're too weak to do them.
Yeah, or the fact that the Chinese had a much more advanced textile culture. They also had a much more advanced laundry culture. They had laundry technology that was far and away better than anything anybody was bringing out to the West Coast from the East Coast. So.
Oh, which explains why you always had the Chinese laundries in the old westerns and all that. I never understood why that was. I just thought, kind of like the Jewish people were forced into banking. I thought maybe that was one of the few things that was left to Chinese people to
But
do.
it's sort of one of those things where both things are true. Yeah, Jews couldn't own land, so they couldn't go
Okay.
into farming, so they went into baking. There are a lot of job categories that the Chinese couldn't do, so they went into laundry. But they also came from a much richer textile culture than the Americans had, so they just also had better laundry technology. It's like a little from column A, a little from column B.
And man, that worked out really well because there were basically 2 women for every 3 men in San Francisco in 1878. The prostitutes were really well paid and really well treated, and they had really good laundry, which explains why they had such badass clothes.
Yeah, and it is interesting. You think about, back to Ah Toy, you had to be a certain status of sex worker to be well treated in San Francisco, because there were plenty of women who were purchased in China and brought over and basically kept as prisoners as well. But if you managed to sort of work your way up the ladder, I mean, Ah Toy's brothel was creme de la creme. Like, these women were kept indoors. They didn't do any manual labor, so they had that really languid, low muscle tone, pale look.
Well, they were also probably whacked off their faces on opium all day long.
Sure, yeah. and other herbal mixtures, as Ah Toy makes clear. I mean, she's doing all sorts of stuff. But yeah, so they weren't doing their own laundry or anything, because laundry will mess up your hands.
Oh yeah, because that was back in the
Carbolic
days
soaps and the lye soaps and everything. But there were plenty of women who were working in much lower
by the way, guys, if you don't know what carbolic soap is or what lye soap is, Lye gives you a chemical burn. Like, when you use lye soap, if you were to wash your hands with it, it would give you a chemical burn on your hands.
Yeah, it's a slightly gentler version of what you use to unclog your sink, because that is straight lye.
There you go. So, like, working in a laundry probably wasn't all that much fun. I don't imagine it was good for the lungs.
And again, the Chinese had some different technology than the carbolic and lye soap that was typical in America, which, again, why they were able to do it longer. But yeah, everything was boiled. But yeah, working in a laundry was a punishment in a lot of places, especially for women who had children out of wedlock.
Interesting.
Yeah. We'll get into that later. But yes, the high status prostitutes definitely just got to lie around all day and just be whacked off their faces on opium. Now, they were smoking opium, so they were a little bit more with it. They weren't doing any sort of injectable drugs. I mean, the invention of the hypodermic needle, either it had just happened or it hadn't happened yet. They were either eating it or they were smoking it. And gotcha. Unless you really, really do a lot, it just sort of like keeps you pleasantly buzzed. It doesn't make you passed out and like stupid or like immobile. Yeah. No, it's a much less potent thing. It's just that in the West, we're like, well, if smoking opium is good, wouldn't injecting it be better? If a little bit is good, wouldn't more be great? And so, yeah, we supercharged the ingestion of opium. We came up with higher potency derivatives like morphine and then from there. But the tradition of just smoking or eating opium in limited amounts, it was the same as just like having a couple drinks to wind down at the end of the evening.
Gotcha. And they do show the opium dens in there. And they were, I mean, I've always pictured just a crack den in my head. Like I've had to do community service before and I've had to go clean up crack dens and they're really fucking gross. And so that's what I pictured in my head when I pictured an opium den, but they were much more civilized affairs with beautiful rugs and pillows and what have you. I don't know what it cost to do opium back in the day, but given the fact that life was so horrible back then, it probably was a great way to spend a Sunday afternoon.
Well, and that was one of the things. You had, the Irish workers who, to wind down, would, just do shots of whiskey and then get into big fucking fights and kill each other, whereas the Chinese workers would smoke a little opium, chill out, and go to sleep. So, like, who would you rather have on your work gang?
Yeah, it seems like, though, now the more we talk about it, the more it seems like San Francisco was probably the spot to be in the United States. I mean, especially if you were a woman, because you had the opportunity to make great money and possibly get treated more or less like a human being, which was pretty rare in the United States at that time. You
definitely had a better chance for sure, which gets us to Assam, and we find out why he's there, and it's to find his sister.
Yes, who is mad at him.
Yes, and he does find her, which I was like, whoa, wait, what is this series going to do? Because normally when you have, like, the dude shows up with a quest to find a family member, that's going to be season 1. I was wrong.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a show about fighting. It's not a show about romance or whatever.
Oh, no. But I thought he would, like, fight his way through a bunch of stuff to find her. But no. And so this is why I was super duper excited.
No, he finds her right out of the gate.
And she is not happy about it. And she gets an actual backstory, too, which, like, yes, because as a kid reading like Boys on Adventure and they'd go and rescue their sister or their wife or their mother, you never knew anything about the person they were rescuing or how they felt about getting rescued. And his sister, who is like, screw my old name, I'm Mai Ling now.
They're also helpless as shit in those stories. They're just waiting around to be rescued. They're not making any proactive efforts. Unlike this woman.
Yes, he comes to find her and she is dressed as a powerful person. She's wearing all this red embroidered silk. She has big fucking jade beads. Yeah, she's pissed.
Yeah, she appears to be more powerful from her appearance than the brothel owner, who was resplendent in her outfit. I mean, they both look like queens.
Okay,
basically.
this is going to be a great story. And she reads him the riot act. She's like, oh, you're here to save me now. I saved your ass first, because if I hadn't married the husband that I left in China, you would have already been dead. Who's rescuing who, asshole?
It's such a great... I mean, that's really, again, it's the only place in America where you could really have a story like this to tell, because aside from a couple of, like, very famous actresses, I don't think this story was happening much.
I love this as a starting point.
Of, like, strong women who were able to go it on their own.
This was a great starting point for the whole thing, and I'm like, okay, we've just set a whole nother set of messes in motion, because you find out that Mai Ling's protector, he's like, all right, we can't have all this fighting. We got to make peace. And Mai Ling's like, peace will not advance my cause. And then same way with the flunky who's working for the mayor. Clearly, the people who are the seconds to some of the more powerful people in the city are like, no. I'm here for the fighting. The fighting is what I need for my business to work. And so that is all set up so perfectly.
Yeah, it sets up conflict from the beginning of it to the end of it, because he's even in conflict with his sister. And then he finds out he's trapped. Once you join a tong and they burn your arm and you have a brand from that tong, you're in that tong. There is no getting out of that tong. You can't leave America and go back to China, because he asks, and the guy's like, nah, you're here now. So enjoy.
Yep. So the way the whole episode ends up, because I had the captions on to catch some things, when Mai Ling and the mayor's flunky are, so we're gonna keep this fight going. Yeah, we're gonna keep this fight going. I'll keep you getting your opium. When she goes out and takes out those two Irish thugs who killed the Chinese workers, because we need to have the two tongs in conflict, but we can't have the Irish going around just killing Chinese. While she's taking them down, the closed captions say innards sloshing, and I was cracked me up.
Yo, and the martial arts in this show are amazing.
Yes.
Because I mean, you can't really do a historical recreation of the Chinese martial arts of that era, but they're basically using Mi Zhongyi, which was, at least the main character, Assam, is using Mi Zhongyi, which was the style that you'll see Huo Yuanjia use in Once Upon a Time in China, and it's like a Fist of Legend, all of those movies with Wong Fei Hung and stuff. You're seeing Mi Zhongyi, which was basically, that was Bruce Lee's style before Bruce Lee called it his style. So it's a hybrid martial art where they incorporated everything, and the people who did that style were like crazy famous in China. So that's why, like, you could see Bruce Lee's style, like what people think of as Jeet Kune Do being used in this show. It's just Mi Zhongyi with, like, the addition of a couple other things.
You have a much deeper knowledge of the martial arts, but even the karate type stuff, which is very sort of like the end of your limbs kind of stuff, there's a little grappling, but the finger intricacies that come in with sort of the kung fu derived stuff and all of the arm wraps and everything that they do, like, that was so prevalent. I'm like, okay, I can see, even somebody who has like a cursory knowledge of this stuff, it's lineage.
Yeah, so that grappling style is called Chin Na now, which is pretty funny because it's China. But that's a really old style, and Chinese police officers started learning that grappling style very early. It was like in the early 1900s where Chinese police officers actually started learning a combative art, which was before most of the people on the planet, I think. And also interesting because it was right at the end of the Qing dynasty and going into the warlord period. So, like, that was a really tumultuous time, but I guess they realized they needed police who could fight. Well,
police who could fight, but also police who could just kind of effectively bap you on the nose and tell you, like, calm down. You don't want to just go killing everybody.
Yeah. Or hold you at arm's length without you being able to hurt them. Right.
Yeah, and there was a certain amount of calm down. I don't need to completely mess you up because that's going to cause a bigger problem, but just sort of like, bap you on the nose, smack you in the side of the face, make your arm feel bad. Things that get people to concentrate on something else instead of coming at you. The subduing techniques are impressive.
Yeah, but you're not going to get an infection that's going to kill you 5 days later.
Right, yeah.
Like, you learn the lesson without death being part of it.
Yeah. But no, this first episode was really impressive. It's setting up such a good story. It'll be interesting to see how they pay it all off. But, you've got all of your characters. I'm curious to see what the Officer Lee's weakness is going to be, because right now he's set up as such a little baby good guy, and that doesn't feel in keeping with the rest of the series. So I'm curious to see what's going to happen to him.
Well, I think if you've seen, not Deadwood, I have Deadwood stuck on the brain, the movie I'm Your Uncle, Tombstone. If you've seen Tombstone, you could probably predict where a good guy's vices will take him.
But again, because there's some unexpected good stuff in this first episode, we get to know Atoy, and we get to know Mai Ling, and we get to know the two Chinese Tong leaders as interesting, complicated people with pasts. So, I don't know how complex it's going to get.
But they also make the Irish character is so sympathetic, because you understand why he's frustrated. He's trying to protect his community, and he's actually, in terms of when you think of what a mob boss should be, he is exactly what you want in a mob boss. He doesn't exact any more retribution than he needs to, at least not so far. Even when he sees that, and he, at one point, he's challenged by this. He's in the middle of a conversation at the bar. He's challenged by a man who's a full foot and a half taller than him and probably outweighs him by 100 pounds. Yeah. And he just kind of smirks at him and is like, all right, cool, I'll go fight you. He goes outside, whips the man's ass, picks him up, buys him a beer afterwards, and it's all, doesn't hit him one more time than he needs to. And, so he's a very, very ethical bad guy. He's not, but again, not really a bad guy. He's just a guy on a different side.
Absolutely. The mayor's flunky, and the Irish guys, those are stories I'm used to having told, and they're doing a good job of setting them up as well. I'm just excited that there's this really is, an 8-sided story, and everybody involved in it gets a backstory, gets sympathy, gets a personality. So, I'm looking forward to see how this all comes together.
Oh, one thing we forgot to mention, because there's so many things in here but pointing to that, the stump. When they show the stump of, what is the assistant to the mayor's name?
Bad, I don't remember.
But he's shown limping.
The glasses guy.
Yeah, the glasses guy, and he is the name of a famous newspaperman, so I thought that's who it was in the movie. But in any event, he's limping around through the whole thing, and he's this kind of evil, limping shadows man. And then you see him take off his fake leg and massage his stump and stare into the mirror, and you realize that this man's also destroyed from the Civil War, and he is going through something. And I thought that was really poignant, because they don't even tell you what he's going through. They don't even mention the war. They just, the cops are talking about Gettysburg, and then later on you see his stump, and it's, you can put two and two together. But I think that's also good to remember, because more people than not at this time were crippled and handicapped in some way. And that's an important thing to remember, I think, when we're looking at this time.
Yeah, in fact, I think they don't smack you in the face with it, and I just figured it out now. It's they mention the Opium Wars, which were basically contemporaneous with the Civil War, and so you have war veterans in each power circle as well. You have people who are veterans of the Opium War, and you have people who are veterans of the Civil War, and all of them have axes to grind.
Yeah, literal axes to the grind that they took from the Taiping Rebellion and the Dungan Rebellion and all those from China.
Yeah, so you've got the hatchet men on one side, and then you have the Americans hauling around the Bowie knives, which are America never had a sword culture, but they definitely had a short sword culture with those Bowie knives.
Well, actually, it's funny that you mention it, but at that time, at exactly that time, my favorite character of the 19th century, Colonel Thomas Hoyer Monstry, was in San Francisco. He was the greatest swordsman of that era, and I would say arguably of all time. He taught the greatest swordswomen to ever live, And at that time, he was at the Olympic Club in San Francisco, which was established almost immediately when San Francisco was established. It was the richest club in America. It was the best club in America. They had professional boxers that would train there. Jem Mace he was a heavyweight boxing champ, got his ass kicked by a lightweight amateur student of Colonel Monstries at that club. And that was also the time when, there was a famous actress, swordswoman, who lived in San Francisco at that time. And she was performing at the time. So, that was a really important time for both strongmen and martial artists and America and China. I mean, this is really a cool way to condense down so much history in one spot.
It's going to be a great story to follow. And so, I think that finishes up episode 1. We'll come back and see how all of these stories start to unroll in episode 2. Before we go, now that you've listened to a couple of episodes, go ahead, subscribe, and hey, leave a quick review on your favorite podcast widget. It helps. What else do you do with your time, Jamie?
I write for a website called Plague of Strength. I was recently featured on a 30 for 30 episode about American gladiators as their strength historian for episode 1 of that series, and that was dope. So if you have ESPN, you should...
that was a fun thing to watch too.
Thank you. I was crying and running around my house. I didn't know I couldn't sit down. I couldn't stand up. I was a mess. I was going through it. That validated my entire adult life. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's at Plague of Strength, and I post every day about strength history and lifting and all sorts of stuff.
Oh, and they're entertaining and informative. And if you want to hear more about rice and other food history, you can catch me at The History of American Food, which is usually a weekly podcast. Though I go on sort of research breaks between seasons. And I'm mostly active on Twitter at THOA Food, but you can also find me on Instagram where I communicate with people, same tag at THOA Food there as well.
Greta, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but you actually usurped Milk Street Radio as my favorite food podcast. And I stopped listening to Milk Street Radio. You're my sole you're my sole food podcast now. Yeah. You dethroned them. So I got bored with Milk Street Radio. It's a bit too tame, but I love your show, and I love your enthusiasm for it. Everything, your pacing of that show is amazing. I learned so much. And then as soon as I get done listening to an episode of your show, I am immediately Googling recipes or learning more about something that you mentioned. I love that show so much.
Thank you. All right. Well.
All right. We'll see you guys next week.
So join us for the second episode of the first season of Warrior. There's no China in the Bible. And if you want to pick up any other cool beats like this one, visit royalraven.com.